Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity to present the part of our work, especially in the behalf of my dear colleagues, first two authors, Matea Birtic and Ivana Brac. I am the third author, Sinisa, and I would give you this partly oral and partly written presentation about our work. So the name of the presentation is Croatian Repository for the Argument Adjunct Distinction SARGADA. So let's start with some basic information. SARGADA is the acronym which stands for the 4-year project Syntactic and Semantic Analysis of Arguments and Adjuncts in Croatian. We started 2.5 years ago and is set to finish on January 31st of 2024. When we talk about project's theme and budget, there are two notions that are most important for this presentation. Firstly, among 9 members of our project, none of us is a computational linguist per se. So we have to improvise a little and pass our ideas to the developer, programmer, which is an external service, not the team member. And roughly 20% of our project budget is set to be spent on this process. What are the project goals? The main project goals are establishing the criteria for the definition and delimitation of arguments and adjuncts in the Croatian language, which is the bigger part of the project, and the smaller one is to build this syntactic repository based on that theoretical research. So those are 3 main research questions during our project. Which criteria tests are suitable to define and extract arguments and adjuncts in Croatian? Is the established distinction grammatically tenable? And could the distinction between arguments and adjuncts be theory independently defined? We'll talk about this a little more at the end. So before showing you the stage we have reached in the development of the syntactic repository as an applied part of the project, we have to briefly present the main foundations we are using so far, based on findings and theoretical research. Firstly, we have extracted the list of 130 verb lemmas, that is verbs that can select ambiguous sentence parts that can be either arguments or adjuncts. Afterwards, we divided them into 12 so-called macro groups, depending on which ambiguous sentence parts they can select. You can see placed verbals, goal verbals, and so on and so on. Please note this very important notion about polysemous verbs, because different verb meanings can belong, of one verb lemma can belong to different macro groups that we choose. As for example, you can see the Croatian verb stajati, which is in orange or brown here in place adverbials, quantity adverbials, and manner adverbials. So after finding sentences as examples for verbs that can select ambiguous sentence parts that can be either arguments or adjuncts, and dividing them into macro groups, the biggest part in preparing the applied part of the project was to decide what diagnostic tests for argument adjunct distinction are suitable for Croatian. Those of you who are more into syntax maybe know something more about syntactic tests for the argument adjunct distinction. So after thoroughly examining and trying more than 20 tests, at the moment we are operating with the next state, namely omission test, implication test, do so test, this happened test, replacement test, substitution test, extraction of out of WH islands, and iterativity test, which came from different theories, grammatical theories. Sorry. Well, at this part of the presentation, we could show and describe all those syntactic tests in detail and what every one of them is telling you or telling us about the ambiguous sentence parts, but it would take us too long, and it's also well documented and explained in our conference paper. So those of you, again, who are more interested in syntactic tests can find it there. Let's rather focus on our main goal here. It's showing the development of the syntactic repository. It is important to emphasize that our digital resource should directly arise as a byproduct of the syntactic research of ambiguous examples and will not be similar to other syntactic resources like dependency tree banks, valency lexicons, some applications of FrameNet or VerbNet, and therefore does not have a specific role model. This is our try. We'll present the transformation of linguistical research and findings into current phase of the development of the repository and what personalized input interface for project members and setting of a stable working version with sentence descriptions look like. So this is our first flow chart or diagram. Can you see it is too little? I don't know how I can show here. So the main idea was for each verb meaning, we can enter an example and sentence and assign it to macro group. And we can do it for as many meaning of one verb that we need. And then for each example themselves, arguments and adjuncts that are not questionable, so we know that some sentence parts are not ambiguous, we should tag them, they should be tagged, and syntactic test we should use to analyze those ambiguous sentence parts. This is this analysis. Maybe it would be more obvious a little bit later. So this is the example. If you remember the Croatian verb stajati, I think it's very similar in Bulgarian. This is the verb plema, and this is the first meaning. The envelope is placed in the drawer. And we assign this to the macro group place adverbials because the envelope is subject argument. Is placed is obviously a verb, and we should test this sentence part or phrase in the drawer. Is it an argument or an adjunct with these 8 syntactic tests? The same is with the other example. The code costs 500 euros. So this is the other meaning of verb stajati, which costs. So we assigned it to a different macro group, quantity adverbials or verbs of exchange of goods and money. And the third example is kuća stoji otključena, the house stands unlocked, the same syntactic pattern. And this is macro group manner adverbials because how house is standing. Can you follow me? Okay. Of course, the sentence and the example could be more complex one. Let's say we take this example. Rijeka bought the ship from a big ship owner for $150,000. So from theory, we know that buy and sell are trivalent verbs. Semantically, we have to have one who buys, one who's selling, and of course the buyer of the of the product. So Rijeka je kupila brod od grčkog brodovlasnika. Rijeka is a subject argument, Je kupila is a verb, and brod is a direct object, what is bought, and from Greek, ship owner is a one that sells, which is a PP argument. What is questionable is the amount of money in the process. So we don't know, is it argument or an adjunct in Croatian, but I think in most Slavic languages also when we make the analysis. So just this way we could get results that are not binary, but scalar, because we have those 8 tests. For example, this phrase for $150,000 in the previous example would show us with 62.5 percentage that it should be seen as an argument, like in 5 tests, or with 37.5, like 3 of 8 tests, that is seen as an argument. Just a few words about some fundamental and main technical notions. Repository architecture is based upon the project in Laravel. Laravel is an open source PHP-based backend framework. And of course, different programming and markup languages like HTML, CSS, Vue, and etc. are used for structuring and presenting content and user interface. So finally, let me show what the repository design looks like at the moment. Please notice that the interface is not yet fully polished, but we are in the phase of final tweaking and adjusting. That means that our initial diagram, linguistic flowchart that I've shown before are already functional, but these changes in the future will be minor. It is functional, but we still have to tweak some little things. So how does it work? Like is shown on diagram and before, we enter the verb we need. What it says here, enter the verb. And this is the same example as I gave it you on the slide before. So this is the verb stajati. This is the adverbial place, adverbial, and you see the envelope is argument subject, sto is a verb, test, we test this phrase Vladici in the drawer. After we parse our sentence, our example, the pop-up window with pop-up field with 8 tests opens up, and then we can enter the results for our tests that we did, of course, manually beside and entering them into the database. Of course, the results are stored in the database and editable again if you have new findings or decide to run tests again. So we can carry on with every verb as much as we need, as much examples as we need. And this is so far our development stage. Before hearing questions from you, I'll try to, okay, I'm done. I'm really done. I'll try to not make a question, but maybe you should think, do you think, if you understand me fully, would this system work for Slavic languages, Germanic languages? We have Roman languages, we have Semitic languages. Would it work for your language if you try to examine the difference between arguments and adjuncts in those ambiguous positions? So thank you very much for your attention on behalf of